They laughed when his wife compared him to a kitchen appliance. But when this 52-year-old finally stood up for himself, his family discovered who really held their world together. The day I stopped being my family's personal joke. At 52, after cooking dinner for 16 relatives, my brother-in-law slapped my back and declared, "Every family needs someone to make the rest of us look successful." Thanks for volunteering, Michael. The laughter that followed would haunt me for weeks. But what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, respect, and finding your voice when everyone else has been speaking for you. 3 decades of experience had taught me to smile through moments like these. But that night, something ancient in my soul stirred, a recognition that 18 years of being everyone's favorite target had finally reached its breaking point. I've always been the one who handles the kitchen in our family. Not because anyone asked, but because I genuinely found peace in the methodical process of creating something beautiful from raw ingredients. While everyone else scrolled endlessly through their devices, I'd spend literal days planning elaborate meals, hand-rolled gnocchi, slow-braised short ribs that cost more than our monthly Netflix and Spotify subscriptions combined, desserts that would make professional pastry chefs weep with envy. Last weekend marked my brother-in-law Christopher's 48th birthday. I dedicated 4 full days to preparing this culinary masterpiece. Every dish was crafted with the kind of attention that comes from genuine love, or what I'd convinced myself was love, rather than desperate people-pleasing. 16 people gathered around our dining room table, all of them devouring food I'd been obsessing over since Tuesday. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone present, but somehow separate, essential but invisible. I was carrying out the final course, a chocolate souffle that had required 3 practice attempts to perfect, when Christopher's palm connected with my shoulder blade hard enough to make the delicate dessert tremble on its serving tray. "Every family needs someone to make the rest of us look successful," he announced to the table, that trademark grin spreading across his face. Thanks for volunteering, Michael. The laughter wasn't polite. It was the kind that comes from deep recognition, the sound people make when someone voices what everyone's been thinking but hasn't dared to say aloud. My 16-year-old daughter Emma nearly choked on her sparkling cider before adding her own contribution to the moment. "Dad's basically like one of those robot vacuums, quiet, predictable, and only noticed when something needs cleaning up." More laughter, louder this time, rippling through the room like applause. But the moment that truly shattered something inside me came when my wife of 18 years, Catherine, leaned back in her chair with this knowing smirk and said, "Honestly, he's more like a premium kitchen appliance. Expensive to maintain, but absolutely essential when you need something done right." The table erupted. My mother-in-law, Rebecca, dabbed tears from her eyes. My nephew pounded the table like he was witnessing the comedy event of the year. And there I stood, still clutching that perfect souffle, wearing a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. Here's what I've learned about being the family punchline after 5 decades of life. You become so accustomed to the role that you stop recognizing it as abuse. It transforms into background music, as familiar and unquestioned as your own heartbeat. I'd been hearing variations of these jokes for so long that I'd convinced myself they were expressions of affection, the way this particular family showed love. But something profound shifted that evening. Maybe it was witnessing my daughter embrace the family tradition so enthusiastically. Maybe it was the way Catherine looked at me afterward, not even checking to see if her words had landed like punches. Or maybe, after 18 years of swallowing my dignity, my capacity for self-betrayal finally reached its limit. I completed my serving duties, smiled through the dessert course, nodded appreciatively at all the compliments about the meal, compliments that somehow felt like coins tossed to a street performer. I even loaded the dishwasher while everyone migrated to the living room to continue their celebration, their laughter echoing through the house like distant thunder. That night, I lay beside my softly snoring wife, scrolling through years of family photographs on my phone. Holiday gatherings where I'd cooked for days. Birthday celebrations where I'd recreated everyone's childhood favorites. Anniversary dinners where I'd attempted to recreate meals from our most romantic dates. In every single image, there was my face, hopeful, eager, wearing the expression of someone perpetually auditioning for acceptance in his own family. I've never been the confrontational type. Catherine had always managed that aspect of our relationship, handling difficult conversations with the kind of directness I'd convinced myself I lacked. But at 3:17 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd painted, in the house where I'd installed every light fixture, something crystallized with perfect clarity. I was done auditioning, done hoping, done being everyone's reliable source of amusement. Sunday morning arrived with its usual rhythm. I rose early, as always, and prepared coffee with the kind of precision that had become my signature. When Catherine wandered into the kitchen seeking her morning caffeine fix, I delivered the line I'd been rehearsing since dawn. "I'm heading out to run some errands," I told her, my voice steadier than I'd expected. She barely glanced up from her phone screen. "Grab some of that good bread from Morrison's if you're going that way." Instead of Morrison's, I drove to First National Bank. There, I withdrew exactly half of our combined savings and checking accounts. Not a penny more. I wasn't trying to be vindictive, just making a point that had been 18 years in the making. Then I drove across town to my sister Linda's place. Linda had always been the only family member who seemed to notice how Catherine and her relatives treated me. Last Christmas, she'd actually challenged Christopher when he'd made some comment about me being domesticated like a house cat. Everyone had laughed it off as Linda being overly sensitive, but I remembered the look she'd given me afterward, a mixture of pity and frustration that asked, "Why do you let them talk to you this way?" I hadn't had a good answer then. I did now. After explaining the situation, Linda immediately offered her guest room. I accepted, but only as a temporary solution. By afternoon, I'd located a month-to-month rental apartment, nothing luxurious, just a clean one-bedroom with a functional kitchen that would serve my purposes. I signed the digital paperwork and transferred the first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit from my newly independent account. The only thing I left behind at the house was a note on the kitchen counter, positioned exactly where Catherine would see it when she reached for her evening wine. "Find someone else to be your entertainment." Then I silenced all notifications on my phone. By evening, my device showed 53 missed calls and text messages. 28 from Catherine, 18 from Emma, the remainder from various relatives who'd apparently heard the news. I responded to only one message, Emma's increasingly frantic texts, with a simple reply: "I love you deeply, but I need space to think. We'll talk very soon." Monday morning, I contacted my friend Marcus, who'd navigated his own messy divorce 3 years earlier. Over breakfast at a diner that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead, he provided a crash course in separation strategy 101. Document everything. Avoid frivolous spending from joint accounts. Never speak negatively about the other parent to your child. Maintain detailed records of all communications. Basic principles, but crucial ones. I took the entire week off from work, citing a family emergency. Technically accurate, though not in the way human resources would interpret it. Monday was dedicated to establishing new financial independence separate accounts, transferred automatic payments for my personal expenses, canceled joint subscriptions. Sorry, Netflix, but Catherine could fund her own true crime documentary marathons. Tuesday brought the first wave of calls from my mother-in-law Rebecca. I allowed the first 7 to go directly to voicemail. The 8th message, I finally listened to. "Michael, please, this is completely unreasonable. Whatever happened, I'm confident we can resolve it as a family. Catherine is absolutely devastated. Emma doesn't understand why her father would simply abandon them. Please call me back. Abandon them." After 18 years of cooking, cleaning, and serving as a designated family punching bag, the irony was almost poetic. Instead of returning her call, I spent Tuesday evening compiling documentation. Screenshots of text conversations where Catherine had belittled me. Photographs from family events where I was clearly excluded from activities after handling all the preparation. Notes from therapy sessions I'd attended alone, trying to understand why I felt like a stranger in my own home. Wednesday morning, I sent this comprehensive document to Rebecca, Christopher, and several other key family members who'd witnessed Saturday's performance. The subject line read, "Why I Left, an 18-year overview." For hours after that email went out, my phone remained eerily quiet. Then it exploded. "Christopher, dude, it was just harmless joking. Don't be so sensitive." "Rebecca, I had absolutely no idea you felt this way. We need to discuss this face to face." "Catherine, how dare you share our private business with my entire family? This is mortifying." Notice what was conspicuously absent from these responses? Any actual acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Any genuine apology. By Thursday, Catherine had apparently realized I wasn't planning to return home with my tail between my legs. Her entire tone shifted dramatically. Suddenly, her messages were all, "I miss you terribly," and "I never realized how much you handle around here." She sent me a photo of a sad-looking sandwich with the caption, "Emma and I had peanut butter and jelly for dinner because neither of us knows how to cook anything decent. Too little, too late." But I'll admit, part of me felt a dark satisfaction knowing they were struggling without their personal chef, an emotional punching bag. Friday morning brought another meeting with Marcus, this time to discuss formal separation terms. Nothing final, just a framework to demonstrate my seriousness. He drafted papers that were, let's say, realistic about who had actually maintained our household for the past 18 years. That evening, I received a tearful voicemail from Catherine explaining how she'd been declined trying to use our joint credit card at Whole Foods. Apparently, she'd never bothered to notice that I'd been managing that payment for our entire marriage. Welcome to adulthood, sweetheart. By Saturday, exactly 1 week after the infamous dinner, I was experiencing something I hadn't felt in years, genuine self-respect. Like I'd finally remembered what it felt like to value myself as much as I valued everyone else. Linda visited my new apartment that evening, and I prepared dinner for us, nothing elaborate, just linguine with homemade pesto and a simple arugula salad. But as we ate, she raised her glass and said, to my brother, who finally remembered his own worth, I nearly wept into my pasta. Sunday morning brought the inevitable confrontation. My doorbell rang, and there they stood, Catherine and Rebecca, mascara streaking down their faces, practically collapsing against each other in their desperation to reconcile. Turns out, a week without your personal household manager can really shift your perspective on his value. But that was just the opening act of this story. Update 1. First, let me address the overwhelming response to my original post. I genuinely didn't expect it to resonate with so many people. My inbox has become a digital support group, and while I appreciate every message of encouragement, some of you are ready to organize an actual intervention on my behalf. I'm touched, truly, but let's keep this civilized. For those questioning the authenticity of this story, unfortunately, yes, this is my actual life. I wish I possessed the creative imagination to fabricate something this psychologically complex. So, when we last connected, Catherine and Rebecca were standing at my apartment door on Sunday morning, looking like they'd just witnessed the emotional equivalent of a natural disaster. I hadn't prepared for this moment. Part of me wanted to close the door and let them experience the same dismissal I'd endured for 18 years. But despite everything, I'm still fundamentally me, even if I'm no longer their designated doormat. I invited them inside. My apartment is modest, a basic one-bedroom with kitchen appliances that remember when flip phones were revolutionary technology. Rebecca surveyed the space like she'd accidentally wandered into witness protection housing. Catherine kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue that had clearly exceeded its absorption capacity about 30 minutes earlier. I offered them water because I'm not completely heartless. Also, my refrigerator contained exactly 4 eggs, some butter, half a block of aged cheddar, and a 6-pack of beer. Bachelor life, or more accurately, separated but still married guy life. Rebecca launched into the classic, "We've been so worried about you" routine, which translates to, "We've been inconvenienced by your absence." I simply nodded and waited. One advantage of being the quiet member of a family of talkers, you develop an expert-level tolerance for uncomfortable silences. It took approximately 60 seconds before Catherine cracked. She unleashed this elaborate monologue about how she'd never intended to hurt me, how the jokes were simply their family's traditional way of expressing affection, how she hadn't realized I took them so seriously. Classic gaslighting, textbook variety. I'd heard variations of this speech so many times over the years that I could practically provide background vocals. When she finished, I asked her one simple question. If Christopher had said those exact things about you, would you have laughed? The expression on her face was priceless, like I'd just asked her to explain quantum mechanics while juggling flaming torches. Rebecca immediately jumped into the conversation, discussing how families develop different dynamics and how I'd always been particularly sensitive, and perhaps I'd misunderstood the intent behind their comments. Classic Rebecca maneuver, rewriting reality to position her family as the heroes of every narrative. That's when I retrieved my phone and played back the recording from that evening. Yes, I'd recorded it. Not the entire dinner, just the Michael is basically a household appliance segment. Call it intuition, or maybe some part of me knew I'd need evidence when they inevitably tried to minimize what had happened. I'd started recording after Christopher's initial comment, driven by instinct or perhaps the growing awareness that I was witnessing something I'd need to remember clearly later. Hearing those comments played back in their own voices, with the laughter so crystal clear and cruel, created a completely different impact. Catherine's expression journeyed from defensive to shocked to genuinely ashamed. Rebecca simply stared at the floor like she was hoping it might open and provide an escape route. When the recording ended, I explained that I'd been collecting similar moments for years. Not initially intentionally, but when you're regularly dismissed, you start maintaining receipts. Screenshots of text conversations, old emails, even handwritten notes from birthdays and anniversaries that seemed sweet on the surface, but contained these subtle daggers. My personal favorite, happy birthday to the man who proves that even exceptional cooking skills can't compensate for a complete lack of ambition. Charming, right? That's when Catherine dropped the first revelation. Christopher had been visiting their house every evening that week, explaining to her that I was experiencing some kind of midlife crisis and would return once I remembered which side my bread was buttered on. Apparently, he'd also been coaching Emma to maintain distance from me, telling her that men sometimes need to throw little tantrums to feel important. The second revelation was even more stunning. Christopher was in serious financial trouble, like potentially losing his house kind of trouble. Mr. Successful had been making some questionable investment decisions and was leveraged beyond his capacity to recover. His wife remained completely unaware of their situation. The only reason Catherine knew was because he'd approached her for a loan, a substantial loan, just 2 days before the infamous dinner. Part of me felt sympathy for him, a smaller part than you might expect. I asked Catherine directly what she wanted from this conversation. Was she here to actually acknowledge the damage, or simply to convince me to return home and resume my role as the family's emotional punching bag/personal chef? She started crying again, but these tears seemed different, more authentic than the manipulative displays I'd grown accustomed to when she didn't get her way. She admitted that she'd never actually considered how her words affected me because I never offered resistance. That reviewing the evidence I'd sent to everyone had been like suddenly seeing herself through a stranger's eyes, and she was horrified by what she discovered. Rebecca remained quieter but nodded in agreement. Then she said something that genuinely shocked me. I've watched my daughter treat you exactly the way my husband treated me for 42 years, and I never intervened because I assumed that's simply how marriages function. Well, damn. I'd love to report that we immediately embraced and had a group reconciliation, but real life doesn't follow Hollywood scripts. I told them I needed time, that I wasn't returning home immediately, if ever, that if there was any possibility of salvaging our relationship, we'd require counseling, not just Catherine and me, but family therapy including Emma. They departed looking shell-shocked, but I believe with a genuine understanding of the situation for the first time. That was Sunday. Monday brought its own drama. I was heating up a depressing frozen lunch in the break room at work when Christopher materialized like some kind of poorly dressed apparition. How he bypassed building security remains a mystery. He attempted the man-to-man routine, discussing how families weather rough patches and how real men don't abandon ship when circumstances become challenging. Rich commentary from someone who, according to Catherine, was concealing major financial disasters from his own wife. I waited patiently until he completed his lecture. Then I inquired about how his investment portfolio was performing these days. The color drained from his face faster than water through a broken pipe. He began stammering something about confidential family matters. I simply smiled and mentioned that I'd be delighted to discuss my marriage with him immediately after he explained to his clients why he'd been moving their money into high-risk ventures without proper disclosure. I didn't actually know if this was accurate, but based on his reaction, I'd struck remarkably close to the truth. He left without another word, but apparently went straight to Rebecca to complain about how I'd threatened him. I hadn't threatened anyone. Facts aren't threats. Tuesday brought my first text from Emma that wasn't dripping with teenage disdain. She asked if we could meet for coffee over the weekend just to talk. No promises, she wrote. But I've been thinking about some things. Progress, I suppose. Wednesday was when the financial reality truly began impacting Catherine. She called. I let it go to voicemail explaining that she'd been declined trying to use our credit card at Target for the second time. Apparently, she'd never bothered to notice that I'd been managing all our bills for 18 years. Welcome to financial literacy, darling. Thursday, Marcus brought over the formal separation papers. They weren't vindictive. I'm not attempting to leave Catherine destitute, but they were equitable. Equal division of assets while acknowledging my contributions to the household beyond mere financial support. Also included was a detailed accounting of all the emotional labor I'd been providing: cooking, cleaning, managing Emma's academic and social calendar, maintaining relationships with both extended families, etc. Marcus suggested holding off on serving them for a few days. Let the reality marinate a bit longer, he said. Like a good marinade, some situations improve with time. See? Food metaphors. Can't help myself. Friday evening was Emma's lacrosse game. I'd never missed one before, and it felt strange not to be there cheering awkwardly from the sidelines while trying not to embarrass her with my existence. Instead, I arranged delivery of her favorite post-game snacks with a simple note: proud of you always. Love, Dad. Marcus attended the game. His daughter plays for the same team and reported back that Catherine, Rebecca, and Christopher were all present, looking miserable. Emma scored twice, but didn't celebrate with them afterward. Small victories. The weekend brought an unexpected development. Christopher's wife called me. We'd never been particularly close. She'd always seemed to share her husband's view of me as the family entertainment, but she sounded desperate. Apparently, Christopher had been concealing their financial situation for years, and my comment at work had prompted her to investigate. She discovered statements hidden in his home office showing they were on the verge of losing everything. I felt genuine sympathy for her. Unlike me, she truly had no awareness of what was happening in her marriage. I suggested she consult with a financial advisor and possibly an attorney. Not from malice, but because she needed to protect herself. By Sunday, 2 weeks since the dinner that changed everything, something fundamental had shifted. Catherine stopped calling to beg me to return home and started asking what she could do to repair the damage. Rebecca sent an actual email, not a text, with a detailed apology that demonstrated genuine reflection on her role in enabling the family dynamic. Even Christopher's wife texted to thank me for the advice. She'd frozen their joint accounts just before Christopher attempted to empty them. The biggest surprise came from Emma. She appeared at my apartment Sunday afternoon, unannounced. Just a text from downstairs. I'm here. Can we talk? She looked smaller somehow, standing in my doorway. Less like the confident teenager who'd laughed at me being compared to a kitchen appliance, and more like the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during nature documentaries. Our conversation wasn't comfortable. There were tears, mostly hers, some mine. Accusations, fair ones, and eventually a genuine apology. She admitted she'd been treating me the way she observed everyone else treating me, like I was disposable, unimportant. She mentioned she'd started seeing the school counselor, discussing how she interacts with people, particularly me. Then she asked the question that simultaneously broke my heart and filled me with hope. Do you think you'll ever come home, Dad? I told her the truth. I didn't know, but I knew I would never again accept the role of family punching bag. As she was leaving, she turned back and said, Mom's moving in with Grandma Rebecca tomorrow. She can't manage the house payments without you. Thought you should know. And that brings us to yesterday, Monday. 3 weeks since everything changed. I was arriving home from work when my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. We need to talk. For real this time. No tears, no excuses, just honest conversation. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. What she told me there changed everything once again. But that's going to have to wait for the final update because this is already much longer than I intended, and my dinner is starting to smell like it's burning. Thanks for listening, Reddit. Sometimes the family punchline gets the last laugh after all. Final update. Thank you for all the support, awards, and comments on my previous posts. Honestly, reading some of your suggestions for revenge has been both hilarious and mildly concerning. Y'all need therapy. So do I, but that's beside the point. When I left off, I was about to meet Catherine at a coffee shop after she'd texted requesting to talk for real. I chose this place downtown that makes cinnamon rolls the size of dinner plates. Not because I wanted to treat Catherine, but because if the conversation went badly, at least I'd have sugar for emotional comfort. Stress eating for the win. I arrived 20 minutes early because punctuality is encoded in my DNA at this point. Ordered my usual black coffee that tastes like they filtered it through an old hiking boot, exactly how I prefer it, and secured a corner table where I could monitor the entrance. Catherine walked in 7 minutes late, which is standard for her. But something was different. First, she wasn't wearing any makeup, which I'd witnessed maybe 4 times in our entire marriage. Second, she was carrying a manila folder thick enough to be someone's master's thesis. Third, she looked genuinely nervous. Catherine doesn't do nervous. She does confident, irritated, or passionate. Nervous is uncharted territory. She sat down without ordering anything, which was another red flag. This woman normally can't function without her overpriced caramel macchiato. She placed the folder on the table between us, took a deep breath, and said 7 words I never thought I'd hear from her. I think I need professional help, Michael. Not, we need to discuss you coming home. Not, the family misses you. Not even, I'm sorry for everything. But an admission that she personally needed help. The folder contained printouts of therapists in our area who specialize in family counseling. She'd already scheduled an appointment for herself, just herself. Not couples therapy, not family therapy, but individual therapy for Catherine. She told me she'd spent the past week genuinely reflecting on our marriage, on how she'd treated me, on the example she was setting for Emma. She admitted something that hit me like a physical blow. She'd always resented that I seemed content with my life while she was constantly striving for more, more, more. My happiness with simple things made her feel inadequate somehow, so she developed this pattern of diminishing me to elevate herself. It wasn't an excuse, she clarified, just a realization she'd had while lying awake at 3 in the morning on Rebecca's pull-out couch that smells vaguely of mothballs and regret. I asked her why now. Why, after 18 years of treating me like the family doormat, was she suddenly having this epiphany? Her answer was surprisingly honest. Because you finally stood up for yourself, and it terrified me. She'd never considered that I might actually leave. In her mind, I was the stable one, the constant, the one who would always be there regardless of how they treated me. My departure had shattered her entire worldview. There was more to our conversation, 2.5 hours worth, actually. But the essence was this. Catherine wanted to change, wanted to work on herself, wanted to work on our marriage if I was willing. But she understood if I wasn't. I told her I needed to consider it. That therapy was a positive step, but I wasn't ready to move back home yet. That I'd need to witness consistent change, not just promises. She nodded and slid the folder toward me. Inside, beyond the therapist information, was a stack of papers I recognized. The separation agreement Marcus had helped me draft. She'd signed it, every page. At the bottom of the final page, she'd handwritten, I hope we never need this, but I understand why you do. That was Monday. Tuesday brought another surprise, a text from Christopher. Need to talk. My office, 2 p.m. My first instinct was to suggest where he could file his request, but curiosity won. I agreed, but set my own terms. We'd meet at the coffee shop near my workplace, not his office where he'd have home field advantage. Christopher arrived looking like he'd aged 15 years in 3 weeks. The expensive watch was gone. So was the designer polo. He was wearing a regular button-down with a coffee stain on the sleeve. He got straight to the point. His financial house of cards was collapsing. 4 clients had withdrawn their business after hearing rumors about his investment strategies, which, to be clear, I never actually spread. People talk, especially when money's involved. His wife had frozen their accounts and was staying with her sister. Rebecca had refused to bail him out because, and this was the kicker, she decided it was time he faced consequences for once in his life. I nearly choked on my coffee. Christopher didn't apologize for how he'd treated me over the years, not directly, but he did admit that he'd always been envious of my relationship with Catherine. Not romantically, but because she and I had something stable while his own marriage had been built on appearances and materialism. Then he asked if I'd speak to his wife. Put in a good word. Tell her he was trying to change. The irony was delicious. Better than the cinnamon roll I'd stress-eaten the previous day. The family joke had become the family mediator. I told him I'd consider it if he agreed to two conditions. First, he had to publicly apologize for his comment at the dinner. Second, he had to get his financial situation organized and be completely honest with his wife about everything. He agreed so quickly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Wednesday, Emma texted asking if she could visit after school. She'd become a regular at my modest apartment, usually bringing homework or college application essays for me to review. This time, she brought something else, a counseling pamphlet from school. She'd been talking to the guidance counselor about her behavior toward me and wanted my perspective on some things they discussed. We had this incredibly raw conversation about family dynamics and respect, about how children often model the behavior they observe from other adults, about how my silence over the years had inadvertently taught her that it was acceptable to treat me like a second-class citizen in my own home. She asked if I thought she was a bad person. God, that broke something in me. I told her the truth, that she's one of the best people I know, just young and still figuring things out. That making mistakes doesn't make you bad, refusing to learn from them does. Before she left, she mentioned that Catherine had been different lately. Quieter, more reflective. She'd caught her mom crying while looking at old family photos the night before. Progress, I suppose. Thursday was Thanksgiving. Yes, that Thanksgiving. The one I'd been planning for months before everything imploded. The one I usually spent 4 days preparing while everyone else watched football and complained that dinner wasn't ready yet. I'd completely forgotten about it until Rebecca called Wednesday night asking about our plans, as if there was still a collective, that included me. I told her I didn't have plans, that I assumed they'd handle Thanksgiving without me this year. There was a long pause before she said something that actually made me set down my frozen dinner fork. What if we cooked for you this year? I laughed. I couldn't help it. The idea of Rebecca, Catherine, and Emma attempting to cook a Thanksgiving meal was like imagining three cats trying to assemble IKEA furniture. Technically possible, but guaranteed chaos. But Rebecca was serious. She admitted they'd been researching recipes online, watching cooking videos, and had even practiced making mashed potatoes, which apparently turned out slightly lumpy but edible. The thought was both touching and hilarious. I agreed, with one condition. We'd do it at my apartment, not the house. Neutral territory still felt important. They arrived Thursday morning with grocery bags full of ingredients, none of which corresponded to any traditional Thanksgiving recipe I'd ever encountered. Catherine had printed step-by-step instructions with pictures. Emma had downloaded some cooking app that yells at you if you're doing things wrong, her words, not mine. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching them navigate my limited kitchen space like the world's most chaotic cooking show. Rebecca kept asking where things were, forgetting I'd only been in this apartment for 3 weeks and barely had the essentials. Catherine nearly triggered the smoke alarm twice. Emma was surprisingly competent with a knife, something I found both impressive and mildly alarming. I offered guidance only when requested, which was frequently. By 3:30 in the afternoon, they had somehow produced an edible meal. The turkey was slightly dry on the outside, a bit pink near the bone. The stuffing was oddly sweet because Emma had misread tablespoon as cup, not even kidding. The green bean casserole was the most successful dish, mostly because it came from cans and was difficult to ruin completely. But they'd tried. They'd really, genuinely tried. As we sat down to eat, Rebecca raised her glass and said, "Michael, I want to apologize for years of watching how they treated you and saying nothing. For raising my daughter to think it was acceptable to belittle her partner. For not appreciating everything you've done for this family." Catherine went next, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry for taking you for granted, for making you the target of jokes, for teaching Emma that it was okay to disrespect you. I'm working on becoming better, and I hope someday you can forgive me." Emma, ever the dramatic one, had written her apology in her phone's notes app. "Dad, I'm sorry for laughing when Uncle Christopher called you the family punchline. You're not a robot vacuum or a kitchen appliance. You're the person who checks my homework and makes my lunch and remembers which medications make me drowsy. You're my dad. And I was cruel, and I'm really, really sorry. I'm not going to lie. I teared up a bit. But before I could respond, my doorbell rang. It was Christopher, looking uncomfortable in a plain sweater, holding a bottle of wine. His wife was with him, which I hadn't expected. She gave me a small smile that seemed genuine. I invited them in, though the apartment was already cramped with 5 people. Christopher looked at the slightly mangled turkey, the lumpy mashed potatoes, and the oddly sweet stuffing, then at me. He took a deep breath and said, in front of everyone, "Michael, I'm sorry for the dinner comment. For years of treating you like you were less than me. For trying to turn your family against